approach to the question of the world state and the world government is pretty much radically different than the avenues that Alex has just explored. And the title for my combination of somewhat disparate observations would be the world state as catastrophic and existential threat. I essentially want to debunk the appeal of a world state on multiple grounds. And let me start by talking about the traditional ways in which states have arisen, and whether we have any analog to that set of circumstances in the world today. And I should note also that I am an advocate of a world government, but one that is as less state-like as possible. And I'll take, Alex's, definition of the monopoly of capability and authority to be what a state essentially is, and that concentration of capability and authority in the hands of one actor, I believe, poses a catastrophic and potentially existential threat. So why do states arise? I think historically we can see four reasons. The first of them being that levels of interdependence and interaction become sufficiently intense that the absence of government authority is harmful for all of the people within a particular space. This is, of course, an argument that we see in Hobbes's theory of the state and elsewhere. And in Bounding Power, I argue that essentially what has happened over time is that the space within which intense violence, interdependence, and high levels of interaction are present has expanded to the point where today they are global in character. So the primary reason why we would think it necessary to exit interstate anarchy and form some sort of authoritative government, be it state or other form, is very powerful, right? That this is an argument that we see made throughout the 20th century and beyond. It was very prevalent in the theories of the so-called nuclear one-worlders who saw nuclear weapons as having created on a global scale a condition of, in my terms, a first anarchy, a state of nature anarchy marked by sufficiently high levels of interdependence with regard to violence as to necessitate an exit from anarchy. The second reason why we have seen governments arise is threats from outside actors. That all previous governments, perhaps with the exception of a few islands in the Pacific, have had not only to overcome internal anarchy and to regulate interactions within a particular territorial space, but also to interact with other polities outside in an external, or in my language, a second anarchy. This rationale for the formation of a world state or government is now absent. While the establishment of a world state or world government would, from the first argument, be highly precedented, from the second argument, there is no outside, barring colonization of space and aliens, and I will come back to that. There is no rationale for the concentration of authority and capacity in the hands of one actor so as to protect the polity from predations of external actors.
Sorry, Dan, can I pause you there for just one moment? Alex, could you try turning off your microphone? Because I think we're getting some feedback. Are you able to do that?
Turning off my, how would I turn off my microphone?
There's usually a little icon that you just click on.
Mute?
Yes.
Could it be mute?
Yes, I think so. Okay, that's it. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Okay. The third reason historically for the formation of governments and states is a failure of the balance of power. We look across history and most states have been highly hierarchical, and they arise because one group within a particular space gains the upper hand. In the language of IR theory, this is a balance of power failure. The existence of every state marks the failure of balance of power to prevent that state from emerging. When we look at the contemporary world situation, it is very unlike this situation, I believe, because the balance of power failure is extremely unlikely because of the widespread diffusion of advanced weapons technologies, particularly nuclear weapons. The prospects that any one actor would gain an upper hand vis-a-vis other actors on this planet seems to be remote and in many ways declining. And of course, historically, some actors did gain an upper hand through some sort of technological innovation, but because of the extreme levels of interaction today, it's very unlikely that a weapons technology of master effect would be invented and deployed by one actor before others could be aware and emulate it. The fourth reason why we have states emerging, and I think this is really in many ways the weakest, is because there is some form of we feeling, some form of group identity. And of course, in part, this group identity emerges from the interaction with outsiders. The other defines the self, and also the we feeling emerges from government modes of socialization and education. When we think about the world today, this, I believe, is the crucial pathway to establishing a political order that is post-anarchic. We're in a situation where the two main paths, that is outside threat and balance of power failure, are now effectively closed or blocked, while there is a high demand for government to deal with interactions and interdependence. I believe that the quest for global consciousness talked about by many, including cosmopolitans, is the only path that is available to us. Another way of putting this is that we're in a situation now where a vast number of actors are in veto positions, where they have the capacity to prevent the erection of any sort of authoritative world government, and that given that, the only way in which it can emerge is if people see that it is in their interest. And of course, there is an asymmetry of interest and of capacity in the world, and so this really is going to depend upon the most powerful actors understanding that they have an interest in exiting anarchy in some sort of authoritative way. Now, I believe that the fundamental barrier to the emergence of a global consciousness, and note that I am ascribing this convergence of ideas and identity as the decisive factor, the most important path to establishing this identity is an awareness of the actual realities of our material situation. And I am increasingly struck by a great discrepancy between people's understanding of where they are and where they actually are. And I am toying with this expression, geography therapy, as the crucial path to establishing the type of identity and awareness that is necessary. We essentially live in a world where people are clueless as to where they actually are. And this is because there is this great discrepancy between our phenomenological experience of the world and the actual connections in the world that link us increasingly tightly together. And so much of my thinking and research on this part of the argument is to flesh out a kind of therapeutic, geographic, civic knowledge set, and to think about how it might be turned into a globally vernacular set of knowledges. Let me give one example here from the nuclear domain, which is always very important. I often tell my students that for every person on the planet, there's something on the order of 2.5 tons of TNT equivalent for every man, woman, and child on the planet. Now, of course, that figure, is subject to sort of fuzzy math considerations, but something in that magnitude. And I say to them, where is your 2.5 tons? And of course, it's out of sight and out of mind. Picking up on some ideas from Donald Brennan back in the 1960s, I think that we would be very different in our attitudes towards nuclear weapons if everyone had responsibility for their own 2.5 tons. I mean, this would be, several large trunk-sized crates of TNT per person. And if everyone had their own several crates of TNT, I mean, a family of 4, the basement would be filled with the stuff. And people's attitudes about war and the ignition of all of this might be very different. And of course, a further consideration would be that the triggering mechanism for this capability is not in the hands of the dispersed actors, but is concentrated in the hands of a tiny number of, largely 2 really, United States and Russia, leaders. So this is an example of a kind of geography therapy, consciousness raising correction from the geographic cluelessness that is widespread. And more generally, I might note that I place great hope in rising environmental consciousness, a kind of earth nationalism, a sense of shared place that is going to increasingly be inescapable on a day-to-day basis for large populations in the world because of climate change. Let me next turn to another set of considerations that will bring to bear the questions of catastrophic and existential risk a bit more directly. My overall orientation here, I'm actually not in my study, so all these notes are a bit disordered, is that we are in a situation where the human species has committed itself to a project that is essentially Baconian in character. And what I mean by this is that the dominant ideology on the planet is not liberal democratic or challenged by Islamicism or something of that sort. Rather, the dominant civilization on the planet is machine civilization, and the dominant ideology is technological modernism. And we have committed ourselves as a civilization to the opening of scientific doors and the application of scientific knowledge for the improvement of the human estate. And one little factoid that I think brings this out quite nicely is that this is from an Australian environmental theorist, that if you were to take all of the people on the planet and pile them into a stack like cordwood, it would be a cubic mile in dimensions. We could tuck all of the humans in the planet into the Grand Canyon quite easily and would essentially be invisible. What this, I think, underscores is that our presence, the presence of humans on this planet, is the result of this incredible assemblage of machines and networks of machines that we have built that connects us all together. This, of course, has multiple dimensions to it that I won't go into, but we are not only committed and dependent upon this immense apparatus for the commodious living that many of us have, but we are also committed to new frontiers. And I think that there's an enlarged awareness in recent times, and I draw here on the literature of catastrophic and existential threat that has been developed by philosophers, essentially a list of great disasters that the human species has either by its natural situation inevitably will face, or because of technogenic threats such as nuclear weapons, bioengineering and bioweapons, artificial intelligence and the total surveillance state, and a list that could go on and on. And essentially what we are confronted with, in my view, is the prospect, to use the language from Bill Joy, is that we're going to have to develop strategies for relinquishment. This term relinquishment, I think, is a good one to capture the fact that we are going to have to draw red lines and then collectively decide not to cross those red lines. Now, this is, from the standpoint of the existing organization of the planet, a very radical dictum, a very radical postulate as to what we're going to have to do, because we are committed in a very dispersed way to doing precisely the opposite. Where there is a frontier, we want to cross it. So I think that relinquishment is going to be necessary for a range of technologies. Let's focus on the standard list, the GNR, the genetic, nanotechnology, and robotic, that if we're not able to bring some form of halt to the further expanse of these technological capabilities, we're going to have a catastrophic outcome. And so this poses a severe governance problem that might be thought to take us to a world state. What would be better than a world state to effectively achieve this? But my thought is that we want to think instead about having comprehensive regulation of such possibilities without having a world state. We want to have totalistic without totalitarian. That's the key distinction that I'm attempting to think about here. And the reason that we have to have totalistic penetration of a control regime is because these technologies lack any kind of distinctive material marker. And this is in contrast to nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons depend upon this very special stuff fissile material, which if it were all concentrated in one place, it would fill up a high school basketball court. Obviously, if it were all brought together, that wouldn't be for very long because it would explode. But the point is that there's this very distinctive material. For genetic, nano, and robotic technologies, there isn't a comparable marker. And this means that we're going to have to penetrate down to the social atom, and that these authority structures are going to have to be tightly coupled. And so this means that we're going to have something that's fairly comprehensive. But I want to make the case that as we move towards the necessity of complete penetration and fully tight coupling, that the advantages of a negarchical, that is to say, non-statist, and I'll come back to that, arrangement over hierarchical ones approaches the absolute. And this takes me to the next set of considerations, which might well have been put prior to the ones I just did, which is why a world state is itself likely to be a catastrophic and potentially even existential outcome. And the primary reason why I believe that this is the case is that a world state would almost certainly become highly totalitarian. The reason I believe that a totalitarian outcome is almost inevitable is that the technologies that would be available to a world state, particularly the information technologies, would make it possible for a world state to effectively regulate in a very hierarchical manner down to the social atom. Here, the obvious new development has been in the domain of information technology. The great transformations that have occurred, over the last half century have created a material context for human agency on this planet that is radically unlike what has been historically present. And we are confronted with the possibility now, we are erecting, even as we speak, a giant apparatus of planetary information monitoring and dissemination. I mean, here I am sitting in Philadelphia talking to you all in Australia and Ohio. And of course, the information revolution makes possible for the first time in history a state that would be capable of fully monitoring everything that went on everywhere. So I view a world state as something, how many? 0, 5 minutes. 5. Good, thank you. A world state as something that is very undesirable and that would be likely catastrophic in its consequences. And I might continue here with another set of points very briefly about world government and the world state and space, as in outer space. This is something that I've been quite engrossed in recently, and surprisingly, the conversation about space and the advocacy for space is intimately tied up with arguments about world government. This body of literature that I refer to as space expansionists keys much of the case for going into space with arguments about world government and a world state, which I think are quite wrong-headed. Very briefly, space expansionists tend to think that world government is coming because of high levels of interdependence and interaction, which they view as a threat to diversity. And they see totalitarian potentials in the establishment of a world government, and they look to space for establishing freedom insurance. Others I might know believe that we should wait until we have an effective world government to go into space in any large scale in order to prevent the extension of violent rivalries beyond the planet. I would challenge these views and argue that the large-scale space expansion program is likely to produce a highly hierarchical world state on this planet, and that is one of the several reasons why large-scale space expansion should be relinquished. Let me briefly mention three pathways. First of all is that the military dominance of orbital space, the planetary high ground, would permit a monopoly of violence capacity on the planet that would be a de facto world state. The practical eradication of all sovereignties in their military capacity. This is something that is potentially possible. It is something that several states seem to aspire to, but is not likely to occur unless one or the other of the major actors ceases to contest this domain. Second, world government of a highly hierarchical sort is likely to emerge from any of the mega engineering schemes advocated by space expansionists to deal with climate change, energy shortages, and resource needs. These mega structures are envisioned as purely civilian in their character, but have inescapably great military potentials, classic dual-use problem, and that once erected, they would provide the basis for the domination, probably in a very hierarchical way, the rest of the planet. And finally, the great objective of space expansionists is to have the human species be a multi-world species, to colonize other bodies in space. This, I believe, would also produce a hierarchical world government, a world state on Earth, because it would bring about the recovery of anarchy on a solar system scale, and that the solar archipelago would be very much like archipelago Earth, Earth before globalization. Distance and diversity would be recovered. The Earth, however, would be at a serious disadvantage in interacting with such actors and would require unification in order to deploy a massive infrastructure for planetary defense within this larger domain. So for these reasons, I think that we should add space expansion as something that we should relinquish as a catastrophic and potentially existential threat because of its potential to create a highly hierarchical world state that would have strong tendencies towards totalitarian oppression. Since I've run out of time, I'll stop.
Great.